What you're about to engage in is a special recording of the Equity Challenge brought to you through United Way of Rhode Island in partnership with Slate Media. My name's Kevin Mata, and I'll be your facilitator and guide for this year's Equity Challenge journey. These are real stories told by real people meant to humanize the purpose of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and actually highlight the unity behind it. Welcome to the journey. We're excited to have you here. Welcome to the Equity Challenge. Today is day 5, and we are wrapping up today with the topic of diversity and inclusion is equitable. And I'm here with a very, very special guest and friend of mine, Vanessa Vigil.
Hello.
Say hello. Can you tell us where you're joining from, who you are, all that jazz?
I am Vanessa Vigil, born and raised in the West End of Providence, native Rhode Islander. For work, I belong in equity at Brown University Health, teach higher ed at College Unbound, my favorite job of all. And I'm just an overall community member, taking over or helping my dad's business, continuing that legacy, doing immigration work, community activism in whatever way that comes up. And also the VP of Diversity and Inclusion Professionals with you.
Yes, thank you for that. Earlier this week we had your sister with us, Carla. So I mentioned that I was excited because we had the Vigils coming.
We are here.
Exactly. You have arrived. And one of the things that we talked about specifically was the fact about what's going on today in today's society. And one of the things I left really inspired with from your sister is that it's not all doom and gloom.
Yeah.
We are a community that is resilient, and we've shown up multiple times in multiple ways. So I appreciate you saying that, you're showing up right now.
Yes.
And you're here and we're doing this together. So
Here.
I want to talk a little bit about what is equity and what does it mean, right? I think a lot of folks currently, equity is being challenged in a lot of ways. We've spent the whole week so far talking about how diversity, equity, and inclusion is universal, right? For the good of good. It's good for your neighbors. It creates intentionality, right? That slowdown, that pause, and it also creates transformation. But now with today being day 5 and us culminating, help us unpack what equity really is.
Well, I think it's an interesting question. I think it's a loaded question, right?
Absolutely.
I think that it's ultimately everyone's going to see equity from a different lens, given their lived experience, their work, their traumas. So equity can be whatever you want it to be, but fundamentally it should be that you have access, that you feel a sense of belonging, that you feel that you are part of a space in any space that you come into. Now, how does that look? We like to be rooted in color, ethnicity, but equity is that curb cut effect, So we're talking about access. We're talking about different abilities. So it's up to you to interpret it, what it means, but it should feel good. Correct. You should feel good. You should be creating an ecosystem where you feel good either at work, in your personal life. Equity means that you are practicing what you preach.
Correct.
So I think it's the beauty of it is that we don't define it as leaders in this work. It's how does it land? How do you internalize what you've learned and how do you put it into practice? So equity is what you want it to be.
I love that answer, and I've never heard it that way before. I think people usually really, really want to define it's equity, not equality. It's giving people the right tools for them. But to your point, it's so dependent on who you are. I mean, I think about equity even being a practice of my dad being able to zoom in the largest font on his phone is an act of equity because
it is.
He needs it and it's accessible to him and it's easy to do.
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't always have to be this global, large phenomenon or perspective that people have to take on.
And sometimes when we take it in micro doses like that, we're able to internalize it a lot better. And then we look at the macro, right? The big picture, right? But sometimes if we want folks to take in and internalize or digest that bigger picture, they're more inclined to shut down.
Yeah.
Because it's just so much of the unknown. There's so much of how do I get there? There's so much of oh my God, this is so overwhelming. Whereas if we meet folks where they're at. And we start very fundamental, ground level. This is what does it mean to you?
Yeah.
Lead with questions. Like, what does equity mean to you? I'm excited with that, DAIP, how we're redefining what inclusion means, right? And we're allowing folks to determine what that means in their different industries, their different lived experiences. And I think there's a beauty in allowing folks to be their own equity architects.
I love that. Equity architects. Is that like the new name? Like, are we doing this? I think it's great. You heard it here first. Do not copy it. But one of the things that I love about this is that equity does ask us to take a look at things from a different perspective, right? And, we just finished off another conversation from earlier this week with guests Maurice and Shamim, and we talked about the zoom out effect, right? And I think so much of our lives, we live in such a zoomed in perspective that it requires intentionality to kind of step out and go, you know what? I'm not living this life alone. It's not just about me. So how do we transform or bring in equity when it's not just about us?
So a lot of, and I know you've heard this, is decentering ourselves. We cannot focus on others' lived experiences, workplace traumas, educational traumas,
In
period.
general, yeah.
If we are not decentering ourselves, our feelings, and our unconscious bias that we're bringing into the space. So that's where we have to really talk to ourselves and say, okay, what in this person's situation, experience might be an activator for me, right? What might activate something in me? And going in there, acknowledging and saying, I know that this is going to activate me, but I need to decenter myself so that I can be present, 1,000% present, right? Because a lot of folks are interjecting, for example. Oh, well, I have something to say, but that person had something to say as well. So it's just something so little as that, but that when people feel heard, when you're interjecting, you're already thinking about what your rebuttal is going to be. So you're not actively listening. We have to actively listen in order to really capture the essence of what that person is trying to say, understand their experience, and then it's like a puzzle. How do you fit in there, right? What's your on ramp? What's your off ramp? And that's the experience, right? But a lot of folks don't know how to decenter, and it's something that it's not intentional. It's implicit. It's things that we want to, it's, and I've always said this, it's not the oppression Olympics, right? Who's more oppressed? We all have our different lanes. There are intersections, but we have to understand that we do not need to be the center of attention when we are listening. Then after, when everybody has been able to, if figuratively speaking, like the speaking wand or the speaking stick.
Yep.
Right? After that, it's like, okay, now we've actively heard everything. Now let's unpack it. We have alignment in this. Wow, I never had that experience. You get to really get to know folks and really understand the lens in which they operate from. And when there's a beauty in that, because when you're decentering yourself and allowing folks to really unpack who they are, you get to see a side of them that you never did.
Yeah. So if we have someone who's listening or watching this and, they've gone through the equity challenge now this far, it's day 5 and we're asking them to decenter themselves. That, the act of decentering takes a lot of courage, intentionality, vulnerability. How does one actually decenter themselves?
It's I like to call it levels of awareness. And it's a phased approach. It's not something that happens overnight. But once you have that level of awareness, you have your implicit bias, right? That happens automatic from your automatic side of the brain, right? Because this even is on a physiological level, right? We are impulsive and we want to say it. Now, if we're having that conversation and I've explained to you that I need to do this, I've given you that level of awareness. So that can translate in a training, that can translate in a conversation, that could be what's happening on a society level, because we're not blind to what's happening. We interpret it and we process it differently, but that we're still responsible for our actions. So I say all that to say is that the first one, we give you grace, right? Because you have now activated that first level of awareness. So if you go on and do it again, you have done this, repeated the same mistake or activator to somebody else that you know you shouldn't have.
That's where harm happens.
Right. So decentering yourself, again, is a phased approach. It's, okay, so I have a level of awareness that Kevin doesn't like it when I do X, Y, and Z because we had a conversation. So say interjecting, and I interjected again. Your automatic brain is going to be like, whoops. What you do with that whoops determines everything. You can apologize and have actions behind it, or you can apologize just to say it. So intentionality is everything behind it. And we function differently, but we process and we know in our feelings before we say it, we know how it lands. So just listen to yourself. Read the room. Folks show it on their face. For me, for example, all my expressions are on my face. But that's what it means for me as like a levels of awareness is, I see that didn't land well for Kevin. What can I do? Can I have a conversation? Can I speak to somebody else? Maybe I'm not comfortable enough to have a conversation, but you have to seek to understand. You cannot perpetuate the same thing and think that because you don't have a conversation, it's okay.
Yeah. And I love how you made it so human to say that, right? That there's levels to decentering yourself. And it's not forgetting oneself. We're not asking people to be like, forget Vanessa Vigil and your whole life and experience. It's actually center it, but for a moment, place it to the side to acknowledge someone else. And so how do you think we've ended up in such a place now where, at a national global scale, diversity, equity, and inclusion is being, very much attacked and shut down? And I mean, even coming and participating in something like the equity challenge, caused a lot of pause for people, right? Wondering, should we still be doing this? It has the word equity in it. How did we get here?
I mean,
That's a lot of questions.
We're talking about, I think that folks misinterpret, especially folks that have quote unquote privilege, that, don't have to think about getting pulled over, don't have to think about the negative connotations just because of how they look. So again, lived experience is critical. Experience, period, right? Proximity is great, but it doesn't mean that you understand. So this country as a whole has gone through what we're going through right now. Just it has manifested different ways.
Yeah.
So this is not new. This is, there's always been pushback, whether it's on a legal level, whether it's on the colorism, whether it manifests in many different ways. It's how we humanize what's happening and remember that we are the ones that caused it, but we're also the ones that can change what's happening, right? We can perpetuate it, or we can stand where it's right, where we know that diversity, equity, inclusion are words, but the action is what matters. And what's right is right.
Yeah.
We can call it whatever we want, but what's right is right. And we know that because there's still laws and regulations and policies that back that, because it's just basic human rights. Now, if you are scared or intimidated, okay, but educate yourself and understand that you can't be scared of something such as basic human rights.
Yeah.
So the education is critical. Understand the history of our country. If you don't understand the history of Rhode Island. Just take that time. And once you have, again, back to the level of awareness, it really shifts the way you operate. So understand that if you're not understanding, if you're scared, it might mean that you have a little more internal work to do. And that could be understanding, education, listening, being in different spaces. It'll look different. But to be wary in these times of the ever shifting landscape is okay, but there also needs to be action, whether that's just being an active listener, whether that is doing what you need to do to make sure that your neighbor, your employee, whomever, your friend, yourself, right? And then again, decenter yourself. Folks from historically marginalized communities don't want to hear how you have proximity but not the experience. So these are the spaces that folks in spaces of privilege can create spaces for folks, can say, do you need to have a chat? Are you okay? Do you want to go out for dinner?
Yeah.
You know, it's something so simple, and education is key. We can't define, because there's so many things happening right now. We can't say that we know and that we're actively changing everything. That's not happening. But understand that there's nuances.
Yeah.
These words are words. They're air. What are the actions?
Correct.
So that's where we have to stay committed to that. Whatever we call it, whatever we name it, always stay committed.
I love that you really helped me with that process when there was a large national scale organization that actually removed equity from its work last year, before even like all these other signs of DEI was coming. You know, I had a visceral reaction to it because I was like, equity means, you know, it's the definition. I know exactly what it means, to the point of that we talked about. And you reminded me, you said, but what is it that we're looking to achieve behind equity? What's the action behind it? Are you saying equity is access? Are you saying equity is opportunity? Are you saying equity is placement? It's, you know, fill in whatever word it is, but it's the action behind it that helped me realize, when you said that to me, to go like, you know what, you're right. We can call it whatever we want to call it. At the end of the day, as long as we're living the work and living the values and still committed to it, they can call it whatever they want to.
Absolutely.
So how do we help folks right now who might be online or listening, who are thinking, do we need to change these words DEI? What do we call it now? What do we call ERGs?
So ERGs are employee resource groups. So that's a very generic name. All I could say is that we can't take words to heart, right? Understand that words have meaning, but the meaning is what we do with it. It's not the words that give our work meaning. So if we call it inclusion, we call it belonging, we call it a positive ecosystem, a positive culture, again, it all boils down to, what are we doing that is action-oriented in creating sustainable change? It is, I think it's our innate nature to want to resist to change, especially when language has been so deeply rooted in equity, right? But we have to understand that we define what those words mean. And we have to be actively in a mindset that we can shift and pivot. Always keeping in mind that that work is not going to shift and pivot. We have to be flexible and nimble in these times and understand that change is like water. Emergent strategy shows us that if we are resistant to that change, we are feeding into the same narrative of the ones that are resisting. So how are we not so much taking the higher road? We're being intentional and saying, okay, we've had things taken away from us for hundreds of years, and we've still prospered. So how are we going to continue to prosper in this time and be resilient in the face of resistance? We will change, and we'll continue to do this work. Our legal team wants that. Okay, you're scared about that? Great. What do you need me to call this so that I can continue this work? That's what it is. It's not, this is the only words that define the work that we're doing. It's the only words that we've known.
Correct.
But DEI is not a word. They weren't used back in the 60s and the 50s, right? So what was it called before?
Opportunity or affirmative action.
So understand that these things are ever changing, and they will continue to change, but we have to stay action oriented.
Yeah.
That's what it is. And we have to stick to it.
Yeah, I think that that's super inspiring. And It's funny how you and your sister did not come on the same day or at this or hear each other, but you both have a very similar message around resiliency. And I think she said something to the effect of you can be fearful, but you're still required to be strategic.
Right.
And I love that call to action because it's about, there used to be this old like influencer from MySpace back in the days. If you're watching and you have no idea what MySpace is,
Love MySpace.
good for you. But there was someone that said something like, it's okay to feel sad or angry or insert whatever you want to, but just don't unpack and live there. And I think right now, our community as a nation, as a local Rhode Island, we've experienced so much hardship, especially because there was, COVID really impacted people. Lives were lost, of course, jobs changed, everything changed. But we also had a social rights movement happening
Yep.
at the same time that was elevated on every social media platform to now be back to where we are. The world is still healing and recovering. And so, how do we help folks navigate that for themselves with care while also wanting to be intentional in continuing the work of equity?
I mean, again, I am a firm believer in that we all need community. However that community looks, that's not up to us to define. I don't define what you need to do to carry out equity work at United Way, but I will be in your community to unpack those feelings that you're having, to help you strategize based on things that I'm doing or things that I've seen. And it's really just trial and error, right? We can't we can't say that what's happening in our country is easy for anyone, no matter what side you're on, right? Politics aside, we're living in a really polarized country right now that it is traumatizing. It's perpetuating these traumas that we've experienced through the inception of this country, right? But we've always had fighters. We've always had people advocating and doing what they need to do. And we have those folks. So lean into them, create your community, find times and spaces of healing. If that's just laughing and not having to think about what's happening right now, or if that means you're having strategy like our Leaders United, where we're talking to leaders, DEI leaders, inclusion leaders, just leaders, period, from across the state to create space, to unpack, to say, I'm really frustrated, or I have a major win. And you take that with you. You take their happiness, or you create that space for them to have these critical conversations. But you can't do this work without a community.
Absolutely.
And a lot of work that happens all over the United States, specifically Rhode Island, siloed work. We need to become more aligned, because a lot of us are doing the same work. How can we pour into each other? How can we create a collective that is all striving for the same thing, which is access, opportunity, belonging, right? Again, inclusion, equity, we define what that means, right? But there's just core principles that we just live by as human beings. And I think that that's where we just have to, recenter ourselves.
Yeah. And I love that you talked about community. We've heard a lot about community this week too. And again, being a good neighbor, just being good for the greater good, right? But also one of the things that I am hopeful of is that this equity challenge, folks sign up for it. It's the 5th year in a row.
Yes.
That in itself to become a community where folks go, I can rely on these other thousands X number of Rhode Islanders that participate year after year. And whether they're new to the equity challenge or returning again, I hope that these conversations don't stop, because that's what they're meant for. These are just a moment in time, but the real work happens outside of the equity challenge, right? It's not just a 5-day sprint. It's what you do with it above and beyond. So as we're coming to a close, can you give us some words of encouragement or advice as to how can someone who's participating in this challenge be an equity champion or an equity architect, as you said earlier, and keep doing this work?
So, in the words of Nipsey Hussle.
Great. We've already had Kendrick Lamar earlier, so now we have
Nipsey Hussle. It's not a race, it's a marathon. We're continuing to do this, and If you think that this is just a momentary thing, you're very wrong. So that's the step number one, is understanding that this commitment is a lifelong commitment, and understand to give yourself grace. If you don't understand something, lean into your community. If you don't have community, build community so that you can gain and garner the tools that you need to be an ally, to be part of a community that maybe you didn't have close proximity to. Understand that in your journey of learning, you will make mistakes. Learn from those mistakes.
Yeah.
Do not continue to do them because you don't know. No, you do know. If you understand that you caused harm, or that an organization or workplace is creating a toxic environment, do something, say something, elevate it. Will it change something? Maybe, maybe not. But that's what an ally does. And understand that this work, we're lifelong learners.
Yeah.
The people that are doing this work for 20 plus years will always learn. This is fluid. So you're never going to garner everything and be a subject matter expert, but you will strive to be that. So always strive to learn, be curious, seek to understand, and most importantly, be an active listener.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Censor yourself.
Yes, thank you so much, Vanessa. I really appreciate our time together.
Yes, thank you.
And for those of you who have participated with us for this past week, I want to say thank you so much for joining us with the Equity Challenge. We hope that you continue to come back, continue to do this work, find community with us, with myself, with Vanessa, with diversity inclusion professionals, DAIP, with United Way, or right here at the Slate studio, where you can find opportunity to just connect and have fun. So we hope to see you soon, and I hope that you are able to participate in every other way possible. We'll see you next year.